This is a lesson for English 9 for the week of May 4th through 8th. This is lesson 1 and follows both the print pathway as well as the digital pathway. I'm Carrie Lockery, a resource teacher with the Office of Secondary English Language Arts. It will be most helpful if you gather all the resources from this lesson before we begin. By the end of this lesson, you should feel comfortable identifying examples of rhetorical devices. You should be able to analyze the rhetorical situation, and you should be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the prince's speech from Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet. You probably remember ethos, pathos, and logos from previous grade levels. We also reviewed these during the lessons on the week of April 13th. We know that the rhetorical appeals are very much connected and they often feel like they overlap. For example, quoting a statistic about death may also cause an emotional response in my audience. And you can see how there's a connection or overlap between logos and pathos. Today we will talk about how the rhetorical situation is based on the rhetorical triangle. And when we talk about the rhetorical situation, we're talking about the ability to see the means or the author's ability to persuade. As we learn about the rhetorical situation, we will see that the rhetorical situation is closely connected to the rhetorical appeals. Since ethos is about credibility, the writer establishes their believability. We remember that pathos is an appeal to emotion. This is how the author connects to the audience. Logic, or logos, helps the writer develop a message that is organized and true, supported by facts and experiences. In the rhetorical situation, you'll notice that the topic is central, while outside of the triangle is the context, because the context includes all of the factors outside of the speech, such as the culture and current events. It is not crucial that you can read all the fine print on these images. These visuals are just to show you that different people think a little differently about the rhetorical situation. Can you find any similarities between these three images? I'll give you a minute to notice them. There are 5 aspects consistent in each visual. Did you notice the writer, the audience, the purpose, topic or text, and context are present in all 5? We will go over the rhetorical situation in the same order as they appear in the print pathway, as well as the notes in the digital pathway. So we'll begin with the writer. Writers are influenced by many factors. Some of those factors include age, location, perspective, bias, culture, experiences, and expectations. Can you think of any other factors that might influence a writer? What about their gender or political beliefs? What about their religious practices? And of course, their education. And what about their interests? All of these factors can be considered positive or negative by an audience, thus making them very important for the writer to consider before crafting their speech. A speechwriter's purpose might be to entertain, inform, shock, persuade, educate, or call others to action, or a combination of any of these. When you write, what purpose would be easiest for you? To entertain, to inform, or to argue and persuade? The more a speechwriter understands their audience, the better the writer can address them. The writer should use the rhetorical appeals based on their audience. So for you, who might be a difficult audience to address? The topic of the speech is the content. Sometimes it is self-selected, and other times it is assigned. If it is assigned, the writer needs to find a way to be interested in the topic and interesting. Additionally, topics might be broad, such as dogs, or the topic might be more specific, such as the benefits of fostering rescue dogs. Can you name a broad topic? What about a narrow topic? The context is the situation. It creates the need for writing or for the speech. It's always affected by the time period, location, current events, and/or cultural significance. If you wrote a speech for Romeo and Juliet, what might be the context? If you are completing the print pathway, please include your answers to the questions that we just asked in each slide. If you are completing the digital pathway, complete the quiz titled Learn About It Rhetoric to check your understanding. So let's try it. Today we will read the House Divided speech by Abraham Lincoln in order to analyze the rhetorical situation. You should complete step 1, reading the speech, on your own. We will complete step 2 in the slides that follow. At this time, you should have your resources from this lesson in order to complete them together. So what do we know about the rhetorical situation of the speech? We know the writer or speaker is Abraham Lincoln. His audience was the Republican State Convention attendees, also known as the Republican colleagues in the Hall of Representatives. The context of the speech is that Lincoln had just won the Republican Party's nomination to run for president, but there's more to this context that we will discuss at the end. We will also talk about the topic and purpose during our analysis and review them at the end of our analysis. So let's begin. You will notice that our slides are set up very similarly to your graphic organizer located in the resources for this lesson. Mr. President and gentlemen of the convention, if we could first know where we are and whither we are tending. Abraham Lincoln respectfully addresses the members of the convention. He establishes his credibility, which is ethos, just by the fact that he gets to deliver this speech. He has been nominated to represent the Republican Party in the upcoming election. He also uses inclusive language when he uses the word we. We could better judge what to do and how to do it. Did you hear the alliteration that Lincoln uses in to do, how to do, by repeating the O sound? And did you hear the parallelism, what to do and how to do it? Both of these will create a rhythm for Lincoln's speech. He also is showing that he has a clear plan to move the nation forward. He references some policy, and by not naming it, he uses selection of detail to choose not to give it specific name, which was the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Voters in a territory could determine if their territory would be slave or free, but he simply calls it a policy. Speaking of the emotional response, do you notice the diction of using the word agitation? This choice shows that he is irritated that slavery has continued even after policies have been put in place. And so he repeats that word policy, that policy, to show how agitated and irritated he is. And all of this creates his tone. That agitation has not only ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. He uses some words that are in direct opposition to one another. Can you find them? Ceased means to stop, but augmented means to increase and continue. And so we call this antithesis. In my opinion, shows ethos or his credibility because he's showing humility by stating his ideas are just opinions that should be considered and not necessarily the only way to think. A house divided against itself cannot stand. This is the most famous line from this speech. It's also an allusion to a biblical scripture spoken by Jesus. And so this allusion creates the metaphor that the United States is a house, or another way to see it is as a family. And a family who is not united is going to be divided, and it cannot even remain together. It will not be strong. By using this allusion, he builds his own ethos with his audience, who would have been people who likely read the Bible and followed it during that time. It would have been respected by his audience. So he continues, I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. You'll notice the antithesis of slave and free being in opposition to one another. Listen for the repetition in this last part. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease. And so he creates the antithesis between I do not expect, I do not expect, I do expect. This also provides a plan or an idea of what Lincoln is thinking for the future of this country. It will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Did you hear the antithesis that Lincoln creates here? All one or all the other. There is no compromise. This will go one way or it will go the other way, thus creating this emotional response in his audience, most likely of fear. Many of the Republicans are going to be fearful that slavery will continue. And so he goes on, either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction. He uses that word extinction to show that they want it to completely cease. They want to completely put out, just like a fire, the possibility of slavery. It would be final. Or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Lincoln's words create even more fear in his audience because it will either become extinct or it will spread everywhere. And so he chooses words carefully, like all, to show his audience that they must make a decision now. So let's review the rhetorical situation for Lincoln's The House Divided speech. Well, he's the writer, and we already knew he was recently nominated to be the Republican candidate to run for president. But now after reading this speech, we understand that he believed a country partially practicing slavery could not stay united, and this belief influences his entire speech. We already knew that this was an acceptance speech. But now after reading it, we can see it's also used as a campaign speech to begin his campaign moving forward. He has to rally the entire Republican Party together and create unity between them. They are his audience. So some of them were his friends, and they're all Republicans. But part of his audience may have been Republicans who were thinking about supporting Stephen A. Douglas or supporting slavery. And so Lincoln knew that not all of his audience believed the same thing he believed, and he created this speech to address that. So his topic was to drive slavery to extinction, or else everyone would become part of slavery. He knew that they needed to be united, or they would become controlled. And so he uses this broad yet specific topic. Underlying this entire speech is the context or the factors that Lincoln could not control. The United States was divided over practicing slavery or abolishing slavery. And some Republicans were even split over the practice of slavery. Lincoln was very aware of his context when he gave this speech. So what do you think? Was this speech effective? Well, we know the outcome already. And so we know that he does get elected president. And we do know that the nation eventually goes and engages in the Civil War and that slavery is eventually abolished. And so he was right that this country would do all of one thing or all of another. But in this speech, he uses the rhetorical appeals of ethos, pathos, and logos. And we noticed those as we read through just this excerpt. We also noticed several rhetorical devices that he used, such as antithesis, diction, repetition, parallelism. All of those rhetorical devices made for an effective speech. You are going to read another speech today for Show What You Know from Romeo and Juliet. See if you can apply some of these same rhetorical appeals and devices to notice the rhetorical situation of the Prince's speech. Today we reviewed and discussed examples of rhetorical appeals and devices in a speech. We analyze the rhetorical situation of a speech written by an author who wanted to unite a divided nation. Today, you have the opportunity to read another speech with a similar context. You're going to evaluate the prince's speech in Act 1, Scene 1 to show what you know, to analyze his use of rhetoric, and determine his effectiveness. Maybe he'll be able to unite two divided families. There are additional resources to help you available in Schoology in the English 9 course. Thanks for tuning in to Lesson 1 for English 9 for the week of May 4th.
Thanks for joining me today. This lesson is for GT9 English, the week of May 4th, Lesson 1. In this lesson, we're going to unpack your unit writing prompt. We're going to review the rubric that you'll be scored with, and we're going to talk through some strategies for really effective writing so that you'll be able to have the best score possible on this final writing assignment for the unit. Let's get started. Let's first take a look at the prompt. It says, write a first draft composition that answers the question, how does an author use rhetorical strategies to convey a message effectively? Use examples from the article, Shakespeare's Ode and Apology, as support in your essay. Use the rubric attached below to check your work. Now I'm going to focus for a minute on my think about what do I need to know and be able to do? Well, let me go up into the prompt for a second. It seems as though what I need to be able to do is to write a first draft composition. Well, I'm going to need to figure out what that is, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then I need to answer the question. I know it's hard, but I always have to stay really focused, make sure I'm answering the question the way it's written, not the question that I might like to be asked. So I'm going to focus on that. How does an author use rhetorical strategies? Well, I've been learning a lot about rhetorical strategies in this unit, and then I'm going to convey a message effectively. This idea of just not getting a message across, but to do it in an effective way is really important. And then I'm going to really mine this article as a place to get examples. And then I want to know about the rubric because it's certainly important that I understand how I'm going to be scored for this assignment. So, thinking about a first draft composition. Well, what is it? First and foremost, it's a writing task. I know I need to write a composition. It's going to be short, but there's a couple of really special parameters. Like all writing assignments, they need to be planned. This is our old friend pre-writing. Now, it's not everyone's best friend, but it is essential. Figuring that this writing task will take you about 30 minutes, you want to spend 1 or 2 minutes on your planning. Maybe that's a list of bullets. Maybe that's some topics and examples that you've brainstormed. Maybe it's a map, whatever works best for you. But get your thoughts organized because, and this is the important part, and this is the key to a first draft composition, it's a one and done assignment. You're not going to peer edit. You're not going to make any revisions. You're not going to write a rough draft and a final copy. It's a one-time writing assignment. Now, it does still do all the things good essays do. It's organized, it has a thesis, you're going to want supporting evidence, and remember that key to using that evidence is the analysis of that evidence, and then an introduction and a conclusion. In these shorter assignments, it's perfectly logical to think that your introduction might just simply be your thesis statement, and then your conclusion is a restatement of that thesis. Spelling, grammar, and mechanics do not really impact your overall score as long as your reader, in this case your teacher, understands what you're trying to say. So this is because it's that one-time writing, it's when you don't sweat the small stuff. Let's take a look at the rubric that will be used to score your work for this writing task. And you'll notice that it's from the AP Language exam. That's really why it's so important that you learn how to do these first draft compositions because this is the kind of writing that you'll do when you take the SAT. It's also the kind of writing that you'll do really in all of your subject areas on the AP tests that you'll take throughout high school, perhaps this year, certainly in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. You'll note that score point 5 has a much heavier border around it than the other scores do, and it's because score point 5 is a really important division. Scores 6 and up, we're going to call upper half essays. Score 4 and below, those are lower half. Now, let's also take a look. I barely included any of the descriptions for a lower half essay because that's not what we want to focus on. They do an inadequate job. They show immature writing. You have some support, but it's underdeveloped. You might not have specific or persuasive evidence. So really, let's just find the old red pen and cross that out. Score point 4 is what we want to avoid, and certainly scores 3, 2, and 1 just compound the problems that we see in a 4. Now, let's go back to 5 and see what it says that we're doing right. They're uneven or they're inconsistent. So it's kind of no man's land, not where we want to be. They do address the prompt, but they're superficial or have unsophisticated ideas. So that's when you're starting to just do a simple restatement of what the author, the article is saying, when you're not drawing any insights, when you might really lack that analysis that's so essential. They might have lapses in diction or syntax, so you do have some mistakes that are really starting to create problems for your reader, but you do get your idea across. So what happens as we start to get into 6? Because these are our goal. So a 6 adequately addresses the prompt. You've written on the topic that's required. You express your ideas clearly, although they might not be as mature as they could be, and they have more mistakes than might be ideal. But you do have explicit reference to the text, so what it says directly, and implicitly, those are the things that you can start to infer from the text. But you don't do a great job with your analysis. There might be, again, there's lapses in diction or syntax, so the odd mistake here and there, but overall, it shows that you know how to be a good writer. So with a 6, you're really starting to be on track with a strong answer in a response to the prompt and good writing. A 7 does all the things a 6 does, but you've done a better job with your analysis of the source. Remember, in this case, it's the Shakespeare article, and you have a more mature writing style. So that's going to be strong word choice, strong sentences, strong organization, a really varied style. All of those things are important. Now, by the time we get to an 8, we're really cooking. You have done an effective job. You've really read and understood the article. You've done a good job on what the prompt is asking you to do. Now, you can really be thoughtful. You can reason with perception. So you can really dig into what it is that the author is saying in the article, and then you write about it in a mature way. You have strong analysis of your examples, and then you're really going to get into all the nuances of the text. But please note right here, it is not flawless. Still, you're going to get up into impressive language with a 9. It's not perfect either. They're especially apt. You've done a really good job in their analysis. You really are just have all of your jets firing, and it's a great job. Let's set our aim for score 6, 7, 8, and 9, and let's not spend any time down here in our 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. Well, I needed to know about rhetorical strategies. That's certainly a key part of the writing prompt. So I want you to think back over all the things that you've learned in this unit, particularly our friends ethos, pathos, and logos, and the use of them in the rhetorical triangle. Ethos, let's remind ourselves, is that idea about credibility. Why is it that the writer is someone who could be believed? Are they calling on other people who are people who could be believed, who have strong credibility? How does logos, or that idea of data and facts, those really kind of objective measures, how do they contribute? Do they connect to ethos? Does ethos connect to the logos? How does what someone is saying make them someone to be believed? Should we believe the data because of their ethos? And then pathos. How is it that all of this starts to create feelings for us? Remember our analysis that we did of Atticus's closing argument from Mockingbird. in the last video lesson together, and how sometimes these all start to wind on top of each other, right? Maybe ethos is going to start to create a feeling of pathos for us because this is someone we should believe. Now we're going to feel a different way. Maybe a particular data set is going to make us feel angry or upset. So really concentrate on this rhetorical triangle and how these three elements are at work in the Shakespeare essay. Tone is really important in writing. What is it that the author is showing his or her attitude is toward the subject? And then how does diction create tone? And how does diction create meaning? All writers use diction because all writers use words. But what's the purpose of those word choices? What is the purpose of what that author's doing? Is the repetition? Why? How? What's the importance of it? Think about some of the specific literary devices we talked about. Allusion, that idea of hinting at one text in another. Alliteration, repetition of consonant sounds. Anaphora, remember that anaphora was that repetition of an initial phrase. Martin Luther King did it really well when he said, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. And then think about how authors use very precise language. Is it an overall level of language? Is it a maturity and elevation of their vocabulary? Is it very specific jargon? How does that all contribute? Because what's really, really important that we get into is how does the author create that effective message? Because overall, that's what we're trying to do in this assignment. And that brings us to a couple of last ideas. Please remember that you're not being asked whether you agree or disagree with the points the author's making. That's not the purpose of this writing task. But you are really looking at how the author conveys the message and what's the role of the rhetorical strategies in that. That's a very, very different task than agreeing or disagreeing with the overall message. Think about what you know about how authors typically organize writing. Where's the thesis? I hope you thought to yourself that it's usually in paragraph 1, because that is where it is. Often at the very end of paragraph 1, the writer's taken some time to get our attention, to pique our interest, and then it's time for the thesis. Reinforced? Well, I'm going to look at the conclusion of this article. And if these ideas between the first paragraph and the last agree, then I think I'm